Hello and welcome inside the training room. I am your host, Dr. Ken Kaufman, and I am absolutely pumped to have you here where you get exclusive, behind-the-scenes, VIP access into the training rooms of professional sports. In this episode of Inside the Training Room, we have a very special guest, and he has been a huge influence on my clinical approach to treating my patients. He is the foremost expert on sports injury tissue repair and healing. He's the anti-Iceman, Gary Reinl. He is the author of Iced, the illusionary treatment option. He's had a 45-year career working in the field with top-level athletes from the NFL, MLB, MLS, NBA, and countless college teams. So welcome, inside the training room, Gary Reinl. Well, Gary, I want to thank you for joining us inside the training room. And I know we've had a lot of discussions, and I'm very excited to have you on our podcast, simply because your wealth of knowledge and your long experience in the sports medicine field, the prolific writing that you've done, and certainly as our guests are going to find out, you're the author of Iced, the illusionary treatment option. It's available on Amazon. And that book was actually after speaking with Brian Roberts at the Baltimore Orioles facility back several years ago. And when they were treating a guy that had torn his knee up, and his knee was swollen, and I took Brian Ebel aside and I said, "Why aren't you icing his knee?" And he goes, "Oh, we don't ice injuries anymore." And I'm like, "Wait, what? What are you talking about?" And so that kind of started my path to the meltdown. And so, Gary, I want to thank you for being on the show. And I know we spoke out in Vegas a couple of months ago. And ladies and gentlemen, hold on to your hats. And this is going to be recorded, so you'll be able to go back and revisit this, because Gary is just a wealth of knowledge and has a tremendous amount of information and ways of describing things. Because quite frankly, there's a lot of pushback on the whole idea of not icing injuries. And, it's just interesting, some of the feedback and, in my process of getting people to stop icing injuries and talking to other professionals, they give me the same, like, "Wait, what are you talking about?" But you have just a fantastic way to describe things and the physiology and whatnot. So let me ask you a question. How did you start off with kind of this path? Because you've been doing sports medicine for 45 years or 7 years, something like that.
47 now, aren't we? Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
How this all got started was 20 years ago, when I came back to working with elite athletes, I made a decision that I wanted to be relevant. But my first touch was back in 1973, working with elite athletes. And I owned the Nautilus gym back in those days. Anyone old enough to know what that is? It was a type of exercise equipment. And in effect,
Right.
I was a strength coach. They didn't call you a strength coach, but that's what I was. And when I came back all those years later to about the year back to April 1st, 2000s, when I came back, I took a look and I realized real quick I wasn't qualified to be a strength coach. The whole process had changed to where people had gone to school for 6-7 years to be a strength coach. And I said, well, How can I fit? And I started to look, and there was a product that I had been using in my rehab world that I saw had some use in professional athletics. And I said, well, let me go see if I can figure out the best way to use this product with professional athletes. And first thing that you find out when you walk into the rehab setting, into the recovery setting in college and pro sports and the Olympic athletes, and as soon as you walk in, you immediately realize that there is something going on there, and it's called the RICE protocol. That's rest, ice, compression, and elevation. And unquestioned in 2000, I thought it was correct too. I thought, well, this is what we do, so let me see how I can fit this electrical stimulation product into that process. And with that, I quickly realized that I had to figure out the best way to use ice with my product. Not even considering taking
Okay.
ice out of the equation. That wasn't the question. It
Yeah.
was, well, what would be the best
Right.
way to use my product while you're doing the rice protocol? And I quickly realized that if you were going to use something that was going to increase circulation, you wouldn't want to simultaneously do something that decreased circulation.
Decreases
And the
circulation.
and the
Right.
rice protocol clearly decreases circulation. I mean, it's what it does. When you sit still with a
Yeah.
bag of ice wrapped tightly around the body part with it sticking up in the air, it's going to decrease circulation. Well, it wouldn't
Right.
make sense then to use an electrical stimulation product to increase circulation while you are simultaneously decreasing circulation. So I said, well,
Hmm.
let's not do the icing and the ricing the same time you're doing the electrical stimulation. And that was a
Hmm.
good enough answer at first. People said, "Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
should I do it after I rice or while?" Well, I won't do it while. So should I do it before? And given the choice, I said, "Well, let's do it before because I don't want to overcome the obstacles created with circulation by doing the rice protocol
Right.
first." So started doing that, and that was a good enough answer for most people. And in those days, by the way, there was no pushback. It was okay. Well, that makes sense. So that's slowing things down. You're speeding it up. Let's speed it up, and
Hmm.
we'll go from there. Well, that answer soon wasn't good enough for me.
Yeah.
I had to have to be comfortable. When when you've been in
Hmm.
the elite world for many years now, and you know if you're going to go in the room with
Yeah.
the people who are the smartest and the best, and that doesn't mean that some guy who's a high school athletic trainer couldn't be the smartest or the best. I'm just saying that if to
Hmm.
get to the top of the heap, if you're the head trainer of the Baltimore Orioles, you're not regular. Okay, so
Yeah.
these
Right.
people ask hard questions, and they want you to prove things. And I got to a spot where I
Hmm.
went, well, why are we doing the rice protocol again? And then people
Yeah.
started to
Yeah.
explain to me why they were doing it. And I said, wait a second, these answers are inconsistent and they don't make sense. So I went on a mission.
Right.
Took me a little over 7 years. And during that time, what I
Wow.
did was interviewed athletic trainers, physical therapists, sports medicine docs, all around the country. And nearly every professional athletic team, by the
Hmm.
way, in the four big leagues, in the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball. Almost everyone. There's only a few people I missed. It's only because they didn't
Hmm.
see me, not because I didn't try. And then
Yeah.
in
Right.
soccer, I got to about half the trainers. And soccer was the last group that I got to. So it wasn't that the soccer people weren't interested. It's just not where I went first. Because 20 years ago,
Right.
soccer in
Right.
this country wasn't that big of a deal. And no offense to it, but it's
Right.
growing now, but it wasn't then.
Sure.
And I went to the Olympic training centers, and then anybody who said they were famous, I went to them. For example, down to the Michael Johnson Training Center in outside Dallas. I went there because there's a
Hmm.
big place. I'm going to go there. I went to
Right.
Eric Cressy, who is training a lot of Major League Baseball players. Went to
Yep.
Apollo Ono's trainer up in Pennsylvania, and we traveled all over the country nonstop for 7 years, just
Hmm.
everywhere, saying to everybody that I went to, "What are you doing when people are injured? When you're trying to recover, what are you doing? Why? And do you have any proof that what you're doing is the right thing?" And I quickly realized that there were people doing all kinds of things. Let's just take a simple thing like
Hmm.
the ice part of the rice protocol. Some people only use crushed ice. Some people only use cold air. Some people only use cold water with compression. Some people only did it after
Hmm.
therapy. Some people did it before and after. Some people only did it the first week. Some people did it continuously until the injury was fully resolved. And I went, well, there's just got to be a best way to use ice. I mean, there just
Yeah.
has to
Yeah.
be. And then I asked simple questions like, well, so how cold are you trying to make the area? And how do you know when you got it that cold? And how often do you need to make it
Hmm.
that cold? For how many weeks or days or how long do you make it cold like that? And if you had a deep bone bruise, how would you get it down to the temperature you're trying to get it without causing damage to the superficial tissue? Well,
Right.
no one answered any of those questions. And then I quickly realized there's no such protocol. And then I asked the hard questions like, well, how would you accommodate for the insulating factors of fat?
Right.
So say someone's 22% body fat and someone else is only 6% body fat. Obviously, there's an insulating factor, so how would you accommodate it? And then by the way, how would you know when you got it to the temperature you tried to get it to? And could you show me somewhere in the literature, somewhere in science, the Gravedigger's Journal, pick anything you want. Show me where it says what temperature you're supposed to get it to. None of that's possible, and there's no such protocol. So I set out to figure out the best way to use ice. And I thought, when I'm all done, I'm going to be the world authority on the idea of how to use ice in an injury. And I had a written goal to become the number one person in the world on the best way to use ice. Well, unfortunately, as time passed, I started to realize that the best way to use ice was never. And then the problems start, because now I realize it's wrong.
Join us in the next informative episode Inside the Training Room, where Gary Reinl will reveal how he changed his entire approach to treating sports injuries and how he proved it to some of the top medical minds, including the originator of the RICE protocol, Dr. Gabe Merkin.